Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the Soft Landing Podcast, a gentle space for self-discovery. Today, it's just me, Rafaela, and this week we are talking about the touchy topic of infidelity and betrayal. And to help us do that, we are joined by our guest today, Nicole Murdock. For nearly 10 years, Nicole has focused on helping individuals and couples navigate the complexities of mental well-being and strengthening the bonds that unite them. Her approach to counseling is comprehensive, adaptable, and eclectic. This is showcased by her training in EMDR and TAC, as well as her utilization of NMT, CBT, solutions-focused, family systems, narrative, and client-centered therapies. Her diverse skill set allows for her to tailor her work for each client's unique needs, promoting healing and growth. Beyond her professional life, Nicole finds joy in dancing to the rhythm of Zumba, engaging in strategic battles through board games, and savoring quality time with her family. Welcome to the pod, Nicole.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. I'm so excited to have you appear on the podcast today and really excited to get into this topic, even though it is a touchy and emotional topic. But I think it's something that we should talk more about. So before we get started, we have Eric's inquiry, which is just a fun little icebreaker we like to offer to ourselves and to our guests. And this week's question is, what is a favorite song you can think of about cheating?
So I actually had, as soon as I saw the question, I almost burst out laughing because my husband and I have talked about this a lot. There's a song by SZA called The Weekend, and I absolutely love the melody of that song. And then when I started listening to it more, I'm like, oh, that's what the song is about. I love the melody, and I absolutely hate the sentiment. So, like, I have a love-hate relationship with that song, but, like, all kind of songs come up, like Jasmine Sullivan, Bust Out Your Windows, and Carrie Underwood Before He Cheats. Like, there's definitely probably a top 10.
Yeah, for sure. I love R&B. That's my top favorite genre, and I know it's not the only one that talks a lot about infidelity and cheating, but there's a lot of that. There's a lot of making up. There's a lot of begging for you back. There's a lot of, what are you talking about? You're crazy. That didn't happen. For me, I was like, let me give a range. So first I was thinking of You're My Little Secret by Escape.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I had to take it back for the people.
Yep.
And then I wanted something a little bit more recent. So I was thinking Giveon's, now I'm forgetting the name of the song. But he has a lot. What is that song? Dag, I just had it. So we like to make sure that we do some ground setting for the podcast just to make sure we're all on the same page with language and definitions. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. You ready?
I'm ready.
Let's start off with just asking, how do you define cheating and infidelity in your work and, amongst your peer group, and just like, break it down for us.
So I would say I probably describe it very similarly across all areas in my work, personal life, friendships, all of that. And to me, cheating is a violation of trust, of boundaries. And what that looks like, obviously, for couples can be different. Some people may view watching pornography as cheating. Some people may not. Some people may view flirting as cheating. Some people may not. But I think when it comes to like a definition, I personally would say anything that you would not feel comfortable displaying in front of your partner would be considered cheating.
Yeah.
Whatever that looks like.
Anything you feel like you need to hide later or lie about or may feel a little uncomfortable with. Okay. But to your point, something that I've experienced myself and especially help people navigate in therapy is the lack of clarity and definition when it comes to cheating, infidelity, and betrayal. So I think when it comes to the music, it's all about the sexual component,
I think going back to what you were saying earlier, it's like, and obviously we know that as mental health professionals, communication is so important. And what are we communicating with each other, and how are we establishing what our needs are for the relationship and what our needs are for intimacy, what we like, what we don't like, all of that plays a part.
Yeah, but it's so hard, Nicole. We could tell people communicate, 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 and we don't communicate. There's
I know.
the emotions, the fear, the vulnerability. Is the
Hmm.
risk worth it? Maybe
Hmm.
they've been, shown in the past with their current partner or past partners, like, no, I'm not going to take that risk because it may play out this way. So I'm sure
Hmm.
we'll get into it a little bit more, but we have to talk about communication
Yeah.
and how to do that.
Yep.
What have you noticed as the most common, if you will, when it comes to your experience as a therapist with what people bring to the table regarding the emotional aspect, the physical, or if it's boredom, or if it's just a mismatch in some type of way?
There were good intentions,
Mm-hmm.
but both members did not really anticipate the
Mm-hmm.
challenges that
Mm-hmm.
come along with being married or being in a long-term relationship. And now they're trying to grapple with the, is this something that I want? And they may start to pull away, which then creates neglect and may eventually lead to the cheating.
Mm-hmm.
Or and this I've seen this more from the male perspective, although I'm sure it exists on both ends, where they grew up in a culture of this is what men did. If you took care of home, if you made sure, everything was taken care of, then if there are complications or even if there's not complications in the relationship,
Mm-hmm.
you have the pass to
Mm.
cheat.
So long as you're
And
taking care of home and the kids and paying the bills, all this other stuff, there's
yeah,
not that big of a deal.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Something else that's coming up is, are you familiar with Mating in Captivity by Esther Perel? I'm mentioning it because we read it for this month's book club, and so it's at
Oh,
the
no,
fresh of
no,
my
no.
mind. So she talks a lot about sex and relationships and how it changes over the course of time just because of a variety of reasons. But in this book, Mating in Captivity, she really goes through historically um, the transformation and maturation of relationships over time, if you will. I mean, that's very, very brief review, but talks a lot about why folks stop having sex and how and why infidelity may occur and all this other stuff. And I know a lot of people find it very enlightening and refreshing because it's a way to maybe realize maybe I'm not a monogamous person. Maybe I was kind of passed down or taught these values of monogamy that have not aligned, and I've struggled in relationships because I've tried to fit this mold that isn't made for me. So I know that I've worked with clients trying to explore different relationship structures and feel more aligned with their identity when it comes to non-monogamous or maybe polyamorous or whatever it may be. So I was wondering if that ever comes up or if you specialize in those type of areas with couples with more non-traditional and yeah.
So I honestly have not done a lot of work with identity and as it relates to like their sexual experience or so when I work with my couples, I honestly probably within the last couple of years have
Mm-hmm.
decided to take more of a focus on when a couple comes in for initial sessions, having sessions where we just talk about the intimacy and what that looks like because there I will say like from my initial training up until now when it came to couples therapy the way that we were trained was to not necessarily highlight that aspect of the relationship unless it identified as or unless it was brought up as an identified concern.
Mm.
So and there was probably a hesitancy even on my part as a clinician to really go there in detail to see how the intimacy plays a part in the relationship,
Yeah.
which I know you live and you learn. But currently now we do take a deeper dive into that area. But a lot of my couples, or at least the ones that I've worked with so far, do identify as heterosexual couples. So I've not done a lot of work with couples who identify outside of that.
Okay. But I think you bring up a really big point. You almost have to really do a lot of research and training on your own to get into the sexuality piece. And I've personally done a lot of training for medical professionals and other folks who are in the field and know that it's not an area that's often touched. And we really have to create more space for it because we carry our own biases and experiences. And I've definitely heard horror stories about, things that other therapists have said because of their beliefs
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
how that's impacted the individual and the couple. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, and to just remind folks listening that it's okay to bring these things up and to ask your therapist, are they comfortable holding space for talking about sex and sexuality, even as, like you said, as a baseline, just to see what the experiences are. And then, of course, if there are some struggles or questions that, you're able to address that with them. So make sure you ask folks that. And, not everyone has to be a sex therapist in order to hold space for sexuality in the therapy room.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to hold it without biases and criticism and judgment
That
and
part.
shame and all this other stuff, for sure.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've been talking about what cheating could be, what it might mean for folks. When you are working in this area and just helping couples out, what are some of the potential signs or markers of cheating or infidelity that come up a lot? I know that's a big question because, again, one, like you said, it depends on what you define as cheating and infidelity. But just in your
Mm-hmm.
experience, what have you noticed?
So the markers of cheating, which, like you said, they could look different couple to couple depending on what you define as cheating. But some of the hallmark signs that I've at least heard from both my professional and personal life are changes in dynamics with the couple, like having more sex all of a sudden,
Mm,
and that hasn't been a discussion or
mm-hmm.
anything that's really come up. Having less sex could be a sign. Unexplained time away,
Can
appearance.
we talk about that a little bit more with this
Mm-hmm.
having more sex?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So something that I know that can be really common in relationships where there may have been some infidelity, but also with folks who are in open or non-monogamous relationships of some sort, is that after you go out on a date, even if having sex or not, whatever, but after you hook up with someone, you meet someone new, and you just have like that new energy, it can be brought back to your partner, right? Like you might come home with just like a little pep in your step, and sometimes you also look at your partner in a different light, right? Where you're just like, oh, like it's refreshing. It's, you feel more connected, or you feel more curious, right? Like, okay, if I've been out doing this, what has my partner been doing, right? And it can kind of serve as a magnet. If there's some infidelity or betrayal that's occurred in a relationship, it might lead to a huge disruption that can end in the relationship terminating.
Yeah.
But not all the time, right? Sometimes it can be an opportunity to understand what was happening and who was unhappy and why and what were the dynamics and what's going on, and do we want to work on it? So I've heard several people talk about, like, wow, had this not happened, we would have still been going through the motions. We would have been in the dark. We wouldn't have been doing the hard work. We wouldn't have really faced the troubles in our relationship. And maybe we would have ended, or we would have just resented each other and just settled, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I do want to ask you, like, your thought, opinion, and feelings about the outcome of cheating not always leading to breaking up. And there's no shame in that, because I think folks can feel like embarrassed, or if they told someone like, "Oh, this person cheated on me," and now they have to go back and tell them like, I'm staying, or whatever the case is. But yeah, so what are your initial thoughts and feelings about the
I am,
benefits of
yeah, repairing and working things out. I am all
mm-hmm,
for it. Like if that couple, and that's one thing that I think, going back to the misconception that when fidelity happens, that's pretty much like a death sentence for the relationship.
mm-hmm,
It doesn't have to be.
mm-hmm,
And I am happy to work with couples who are willing to explore that, because even when infidelity happens, I encourage couples to not make a rash decision
mm,
about the next steps, because clearly this is a traumatic experience,
mm-hmm,
and when we, have heightened emotion, we're not always making the most logical
mm,
decisions. And
mm-hmm,
not to say that you still won't decide the same thing down the line, but let's take a pause. Let's kind of reflect on what's happened, if we can get to the space to do that, and let's explore, like, what what do we want. And so, like, if couples are leaning towards, okay, let's figure out where things went wrong and how we can learn from that and grow from that, oh, I fully support that,
mm-hmm,
fully. I think it can go, going back to what you said about some of the the couples that you've worked with where they felt like until we kind of hit this wall, we weren't really able to understand, or we
Mm,
did not even understand each other, and that's how we got to this, but we were able to learn and grow and become an even stronger couple because of it.
yeah. It
um
like shakes it
and
up, shakes up the foundation.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not fun to shake it up,
Right. It's a foundation
but
after all.
exactly. But it's rewarding to hear that from couples who decide to, and not to say that that's a decision that everybody needs to make, but it does my heart happy
Yeah.
when couples are like fully invested in making this work together and they know that's what they want.
That's a key word when both or all, however many people in a relationship, are committed to making this thing work, because it's not gonna it's not gonna be the ideal situation for someone who is not being honest, who is
Yep.
not doing the work, who is manipulative and, gaslighting and all this other stuff. So by in no shape or form are we suggesting that everyone should stay with a partner if there's cheating happening, but to
Absolutely.
just really look at the factors and circumstances that led to it, and how do we hold some accountability. Doesn't mean that
Yeah.
anyone ever deserves it or
Yeah.
that that was the right response, but if we're looking at the relationship and saying, okay, I know we've both been unhappy, or I haven't been able to show up, or whatever the case is, and this is screaming about needs that are going unmet, how do we commit to re-examining the relationship and creating a space that we all want to be in and
Yeah.
thrive in?
Yes.
All right. Well, how about we take our first break and then get into more conversation?
Okay.
All right. All right, welcome back, listeners. So, we are going to pick up with Nicole talking about infidelity and cheating. And so, we're going to jump right on in. And I wanted to know, Nicole, if you had any experiences with how trauma can show up and or impact relationships and influence, if you will, cheating. So I'm thinking on one side of it, folks who have experienced a lot of trauma and maybe they have attachment wounds and distrust with partners, and that might make them more prone, if you will, because they're maybe less attached, they're more dismissive, they're more avoidant. So let's talk about that. And then I want to talk about another component of trauma in relationships. So, yeah, let's talk about that first, if you have any experience or thoughts.
So I'm sure I have. I'm trying to think of specific situations that I've run into where the infidelity has been a result to some degree of the trauma experience.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, so I'm thinking of, but I'm just speaking of this particular example of folks who are just like daredevils, if you will, and they're always seeking that thrill. They get a lot of dopamine from these type of behaviors. Yeah, that's one example that is coming to my mind because I've worked with, like I said, that description a lot. And it can be really hard for the other partner too. I'm just even it's taking me back to those conversations where it can just be so hard to walk that line of really witnessing your partner while also wanting space held for you and
mhm.
your pain and the trauma that you might have experienced from being cheated on, right? And
Yeah, yeah.
things like that. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, and I may be merging a few examples.
mm-hmm.
So, but just when like you look at some couples who may come in with, trauma background and a partner who has experienced a lot of loss and abandonment, and
Mm,
in both with a parent in some experiences with loss of relationships leading up to this particular relationship,
mm-hmm.
and just that real or at least perceived sense of loss that they may have when they're slighted by their partner,
Yeah.
which then sends them into this, this idea of I've got to keep my distance, or I've got to seek out other ways to get my needs met because I don't know where this relationship is headed at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be very challenging working with, past traumatic experiences and how they're showing up in the current relationship.
Yeah. So varied. And being able to hold space for all of that is tremendously important to really have some semblance of healing for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
So while we're talking about trauma, I wanted to maybe bring into the space folks who experience or have PTSD from their relationship or specifically being cheated on. So I'm thinking about folks who I've worked with who constantly have flashbacks, or if they found out or saw their partner cheating, then they have intrusive thoughts and memories and they can't really get that thought out of their head, or they're asking themselves, are you really going where you're saying you're going this time?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
all the previous times you weren't.
Mm-hmm.
Or really fearful of letting the person out of their sight, wanting to be with them a lot because that security and stability has been disrupted in the
Yeah.
relationship, right? So I think there are so many different components that folks may feel, okay, that's not really the same as other types of trauma, but those symptoms are there,
Oh, very much
right?
so.
Yeah, what do you, it looks like you have a
Yeah.
thought. So,
No, yeah, I was just thinking about a client who shared with me their partner had cheated. They were a couple. I was not working with the couple, just the
mm-hmm,
individual. But the partner cheated, and this was years ago. But still, and yet, every time that partner got a text message,
mm,
my client could feel it, like
mm,
feel that very intense anxiety about it. And we're talking about years removed.
mm-hmm,
So it can be challenging, and especially, and I caution couples that I work with who do choose to work things out. Like, this is going to be a very delicate road, and it may be a very nuanced road, but it is something that takes a lot of time and patience and understanding. Heavy on the patience,
mm-hmm.
because if we are still experiencing a lot of symptoms related to that traumatic experience, that is not something that goes away overnight.
Absolutely not.
Something,
Yeah.
yeah. And even if the event was a one-time occurrence,
Mm-hmm.
guess what?
All it
Some of
takes is
our
one time.
exactly.
Yeah. That's making me think about disclosing these situations because on one hand, I think a question that comes up a lot is how much detail do you go into? Do you really want answers to all of the questions that you have? And how is that going to, if you're wanting to stay in or work in a relationship, like, is knowing all the details going to be helpful for you? So do you have, oh, so I guess I have two questions. One is like, do you have tips on disclosing infidelity and then managing the details or the information that you learn once your partner discloses?
Yeah, I would say if that is your situation and you are preparing to disclose this,
Mm-hmm.
number one, you really have to be mentally prepared for this disclosure
Mm-hmm.
because
So on both sides,
it,
like the person disclosing and the
mhm,
receiver. Mm-hmm.
like I would obviously, disclosing over text message over the phone is probably not the best idea. It's
Mm.
probably good to sit down, depending on the volatility of, of the partner. But I would definitely suggest number one, finding a space that's safe enough to have this conversation. And also being prepared for whatever the response is of your partner,
Mm-hmm.
because this is a huge violation. It's devastating for a lot of people. And that emotional reaction that comes from just learning that your partner has been has done this, it there can be strong reactions. So I would say definitely be prepared for that. And when it comes to how much, honestly, I would say go with the partner's desire. What do they want to know? Some people don't want to know the details, and that's fine. Some people want to know everything so that they have a better understanding of how this all came about.
Mm. Yeah, I think something
Mm-hmm.
that's coming up for me is hmm maybe reflecting on what you want to know and why.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's like you said, I want to know this because it would help me understand better where your mindset was, what your intentions were. Um, Maybe it will signal to a need that was going unmet versus something like, um, well, what kind of cologne did they wear, or
Yeah.
how was their body, or what type of style, things like that. That it's more so comparing ourselves
Hmm.
to someone, because I think something that I've seen a lot is like this belief that your partner or a partner doesn't love you or like you anymore because of how this person looks, or how the people in the pornography look. Like, oh, you don't really like me because you watch this type of thing, or
Yeah.
you really want this type of person because that's who you are entertaining, or that's who you cheated on me with, when that's not always the case. Like,
Right.
actually, that's not the case a lot of times, and you really can't compare those two things because they're different. You are different,
Yeah.
and so but I think that doesn't make it any easier, of course, so I want to be really realistic about that.
Yeah.
But if you are holding space for folks to essentially come clean and disclose what they've been up to, what suggestions do you have about accountability? Because I think there's a lot of fear and embarrassment and shame and a whole bunch of other emotions around, just that heaviness in one's body when you are looking at someone and telling them how you have hurt them, or you're getting ready to say something that is going to harm them deeply, and our initial reaction is to defend ourselves, or to minimize it, or to not say all the things and just tell them to get over it, or whatever the case is. But that's not likely going to be the outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And part of that mental preparation, hopefully, if we
Mm-hmm.
can have these conversations, is to be ready to take accountability. It is, like you said, it's not the time to argue your point, because this devastation has occurred because of
Mm-hmm.
an act that you did.
Yeah.
So let's disclose, let's decompress, because that is more than likely going to elicit a lot of emotion. And then let's take the steps to figure out what was happening. But at that point of time, it's really important that that person who is disclosing
Mm-hmm.
be prepared to take accountability for it. It is, you did this.
Yeah. This happened. So I have an interesting question.
Mhm.
What if a partner tells you about an infidelity and they are questioning if they should or if they want to disclose or not? How do you navigate that?
So I actually, when I have my initial sessions with couples, we have a no secrets policy.
Mm-hmm.
So I explained to them beforehand that we don't hold any secrets in this space. And if there is something that's disclosed to me, not saying that it needs to be disclosed immediately, but we will work through what that looks like. Um, because at the end of the day, if we're holding on to these secrets, that's probably some of, if not all, the reason that we're here right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I've had that happen where someone disclosed infidelity separately, like it's always been together in session. But if that were to happen, I would have conversations with that partner about what the hurdle is to having that conversation with their partner, what any fears are, like
Mm-hmm.
what are the feelings behind not wanting to disclose that information, and maybe resolving some of that so that in time we can disclose it together, or they can disclose it to their partner.
Yeah. Okay. So no secrets. If you bring it up, we're going to talk about how to navigate this and what it might look like, and also all of the emotions associated with it. So you're able to support them in the outcomes of whatever, however it plays out. Before we move on to the next section, is there anything about that you wanted to say?
I know it's a touchy subject. I I guess the way that I approach, especially like the no secrets policy, is I do feel like fundamentally it is important to know the truth. And couples may feel differently, which is fine. But I feel like if, for instance, if it is just a one-time situation, they don't feel like they're going to, ever behave in that way again. The family would be much better if that situation was not disclosed. Totally understandable. But I'm also thinking from the partner's end of things. Would they want to know this information? Would they not want to know? But it's hard to know
You don't know what you
if
don't
they
know.
don't. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, going back to the beginning of the conversation around defining what cheating is, maybe we should
mm-hmm.
also have a conversation about, so, okay, some folks have a don't ask, don't tell approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Usually this is folks who are, in non-monogamous relationships, and
Yeah,
people structure that in so many different ways. But yeah, so some people have don't ask, don't tell.
yeah,
So I guess in your conversation of what's cheating and da da da, what is crossing a line, maybe you could say, listen, these are the type of things I would want to know about, and these are the type of things that aren't a big deal to me. But if it gets to this level, like for example, the money thing, like okay, if you want to buy a gift for someone, cool. But if it's starting to maybe interfere with our financial plans and goals and stability,
yeah,
then I need to know about that, right?
right.
Or you're hooking up with someone and there's been some safety concerns, and I need to know about that immediately so we can
Mm-hmm.
make sure everyone's stays safe, moving
Mm-hmm.
forward. So I think it's really valuable to still have these conversations around boundaries and expectations and cheating, even if you are in a non-monogamous situation, because again, it can look so many different ways,
Yeah,
and mistakes and accidents and all this other stuff can happen. But if you
yeah,
have this clause of transparency and communication, then you can quickly navigate those things and make sure that the foundation isn't completely rocked, or big safety concerns aren't going to blossom from them. So I'm just going back to think about that, because usually we are looking at monogamous folks as navigating cheating and how do you do it, where betrayal happens in all relationships, from friendships to families to marriages to whatever the case is. And this isn't just something for the monogamous folks to figure out, because feelings can get hurt.
yeah,
And if we're not, having these conversations up front, then yeah, the likelihood is going to be even bigger. Yeah. And I think also there can be some shame and embarrassment around, am I doing non-monogamy right? If I'm feeling jealous, or I shouldn't care about this. I'm like, that's not the case. And
yeah.
don't let anyone tell you that. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Do not be manipulated by someone who is trying to shame you because their idea of non-monogamy is, no holds bar or something like that, and they get to do whatever they want and not tell you anything, and you shouldn't be jealous. Like, that's very manipulative and
Yeah.
damaging. But yeah, so you
Mm-hmm.
have to do what feels good. And then also recognizing that things change over time, right?
Yep.
You know?
Yeah.
Okay.
It all goes back to, are we on the same page here?
Mm-hmm. Are we on the same page? What page do we want to be on? And can we get there together?
Exactly.
Do we want to be there together? So before I let you go, I do want to talk a little bit more about healing and repair after infidelity and betrayal and cheating, because we did mention that it's possible. But what exactly does that look like? What does it require for folks? And I know that in our work, we are kind of taught certain steps or ideas of what should come first, and key points of like atonement and honesty and things like that. But yeah, so could you just share with us how that might look for someone and the work that it would require?
So I'll say if a couple decides that they want to move through and work through this together, it would take both parties being committed to this process, because that process looks different for every couple.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Being patient with each other, um, being mindful that there is no time frame for how long this healing process takes.
Mm.
It could be 5 months, it could be 5 years.
Yeah.
So having that patience, or knowing going in that there's going to be patience needed, there's going to be a lot of grace needed through this journey. Starting to explore, and personally, I would recommend doing this with a mental health professional, just because it can be tricky navigating this journey to healing and
Mm-hmm.
repair. But being open, being totally vulnerable, having that patience, having that understanding that I don't know what may be expected of me, but I'm prepared to give what I need in order to help this journey
Mm.
along. That's all I can think of right
Yeah.
now.
But I think that is a really good picture of the emotional component and what it would require, because we know there can just be a lot of disappointment and upset and anger and grief, and it can cycle over and over again, right? You think,
Yes.
as a person who felt or was betrayed, or you may have a moment of feeling like, okay, we're getting on the up
Mm-hmm.
and up, and then something can just take you right back there, or a text message, or they step out of the room, or whatever the case is, and it
Yeah.
again, that PTSD, it takes you right back to
Yep.
that moment, and how we have to be patient in that process. If we're the betrayed person, being patient with ourselves, and if the person who caused the harm, being patient with our partner to navigate those emotions, and knowing that we are committed to growing together, hopefully. And also think that might change. You might do all
Yeah.
this work and you say, you know what, I just can't get over it,
Yeah.
or it's just not working, or the needs that were highlighted because of this, I'm not able to meet them for you. I tried, but it's not working. And so this cheating may happen again and we're
Yeah.
not going to be satisfied. So maybe we are not compatible. So I love that you mentioned just all of that emotional labor that it will require, and that it's hard because more than likely that was missing in the first place. Otherwise, maybe there could have been more transparent conversation about the needs before the cheating and the betrayal happened, right? So it's not like it easy, like it's like we said at the beginning. Yeah, communicate. Okay, and how
Yeah.
and when and how do I manage my anxiety and all
Yeah.
this other stuff. So in addition to that, I think maybe something else that can be hard is managing the outside noise, right? So how many people know about this,
Mm-hmm.
um, and are they supportive or not? I mean, I think at the end of the day, they're probably supportive. They want you to be happy, but sometimes it's like they want you to break up, right?
Yeah.
Versus like, hey, we are working on things, so I need you to maybe tone down the criticism towards my partner because it's making me feel some type of way. And how much or little do you might want to tell people. So I think that's a big thing too, because it can really influence how we show up and what we want to do. So be
Absolutely.
mindful of
Yeah.
that in the repair process of like, okay, how much of my business am I going to let people in on? And is that going to,
Exactly.
because is their commentary going to influence
Yeah.
anything? Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. The social stigma
Mm-hmm.
with this also plays a big part.
Yeah. Well, that's why we just have to listen to SZA and all these other people. Don't listen to the ones that's like, break up with them right now. Listen to the music that's like, okay, we're going to make it work.
Chill.
Oh, all right, Nicole. Well, thank you so much for being with us. Before we really head out this time, we wanted to just ask you,
Mhm.
what are your final thoughts or any advice that you would like to share with our listeners on this topic today?
You know what? I think it goes back to what we've been saying all along, and how, and I know when I use the word communication, we we can take that in several different ways, like, right, like, but this is a topic that it either impacts you personally, or somebody who it's been impact or who's been impacted by it. This is something that we really do need to talk about
Mm.
because it's prevalent in our society, and just knowing ways to have that discussion. I would, if you're already connected to a therapist, I would definitely have that conversation with your therapist
Mm.
about the ways to approach that with your partner. Or if, I honestly, I feel like you can make it a very non-uncomfy conversation by bringing up songs,
Mm.
bringing up maybe a movie in which a person was cheated on. Just kind of getting their take, getting a feel for what they even think infidelity means, what, what that means to them, maybe what's been their experience with infidelity. Because some couples don't have those conversations.
Yeah.
And it's not until we hit our crisis period where somebody was wronged and now we have an issue. And we really need to be more proactive about that. If nothing else, it helps us just to gain more understanding and clarity about our relationship and where we stand. But it really could help sort of build that. Of course, like connection, building understanding and trusting your partner, but it really would help us to start having these conversations before a crisis happens.
Yeah. Creating space to think about it, because again, maybe you haven't thought about things outside of, sexual experiences or outside of monogamy. Maybe you're listening to this podcast and you're like, oh, say more about this open relationship thing. I've struggled with monogamy and I want to explore that more deeply. But yeah, okay. Well, thank you so much for those final tips. And that brings us to a close. So again, thank you so much for joining us and talking about the complexities and messiness of infidelity. Here's hoping this conversation and our words can support you if this topic resonates with you. And if you are interested in ethical non-monogamy and polyamory, please join us next week as we begin to talk about that very thing. You can follow us at Soft Landing Podcast on Instagram and at healingexchange.com/podcast. Check us out on Spotify and YouTube Music. And while you're there, be sure to rate and subscribe. Thank you again, and we'll see you next week. Bye.